This is not a test. Stay calm in an orderly fashion. Make your way to the lifeboats.
Mayday, the ship is sinking.
Any hopes for the future, anything like that?
I guess hopes would just be that it's a way to bring the recovery field to people that wouldn't usually otherwise be able to experience it. People aren't going to meetings, people aren't going to seminars, can listen to this.
If I couldn't agree more. Well, with that being said, let's go ahead and introduce ourselves. So my name is Christian Powell, and I'm going to be one of the two co-hosts, although you'll probably see a litany of people. One of the two co-hosts of Lifeboat Recovery Cast, and with me sits the other co-host and the man that I'm interviewing today.
And named Hunter Taylor. I'm a peer recovery coach, and I am a recovery coach trainer, and I've worked in this field for about a year and a half, and have some experience in recovery myself. So
let's just break it down, because this is kind of the first interview that we're going to be doing right off the block. What is your experience with recovery?
So I'm in recovery myself from methamphetamines. It's been about 2.5 years yesterday, actually, that I've been clean.
Congratulations.
Yeah,
I mean, that's
thanks.
big stuff.
Yeah, for sure.
How does that feel?
It feels pretty good, man. It's a blessing. I don't know how I got this far, but it just happened, I guess,
Not too bad. Not too bad. So let's bring the mic up just a little bit more.
Yeah.
So with that, thinking 2.5 years ago, what was your thought? Did you ever think you'd make it here? And then kind of now thinking back to 2.5 years ago, like, what are your thought process? How does that come up?
Man, 2.5 years ago, when I was still in active addiction, I didn't know what I was doing. When I even went to go get help, it's like I really didn't know where that was going to take me. There was really no plan for the future. It was kind of just can't do what I'm doing right now, so I got to do something, right? So
Sure. So in that something, can you go ahead and break apart for us what exactly? Talk a little bit about your addiction, and then where you came out of your addiction. Did you hit rock bottom? What happened?
Yeah, so I started using meth when I was 16. I'd been smoking weed before that sort of thing, and quickly, about a year after I started, kind of lost the family, lost the car, lost a place to live. I started going really downhill. Kind of hit me all of a sudden, hey, you're heading somewhere bad, but didn't really care because I wanted to get high. So
what was your family's perspective on that?
My family was really supportive. It came from different sides, I guess, but really hurt. The ways they expressed that was a little bit different. My dad kind of
the I'm not angry, I'm disappointed.
Exactly.
Vibe.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. Yep. And my dad did everything he could do, and my mom did everything she could do. But ultimately, I had to come to that conclusion myself. But I would say that was one of the big motivators. Seeing my family, how I was hurting them and stuff like that, as motivator to get clean. So.
Okay. So you start to get clean. Where do you first get clean at? What happens?
So I went to treatment in Battle Creek, and that was kind of my first move. I had a conversation, and my mom basically told me if I didn't drug test for her, I was getting court committed. Yeah. So,
geez. Okay.
Right.
Easy, moms.
Yeah. I was like, okay, and I was at that point, I was pretty miserable anyway. So I'm like, okay, I'll give it a try. I slept for 3 days because I was detoxing off meth. And then I woke up, and basically I was up a couple times during that, woke up, went to the bathroom, got something to drink, went back to sleep. I called my mom and was like, I can't do this. I need to go get some help. I at least had enough common sense to be like, okay, I'm going to relapse. There's no, if I relapse, it's when. So I called, and then I went to sleep over her place that night. She took me to her house, and then the next morning she was ready to send me off to treatment. She had called the place, got it lined up. So my uncle went to treatment at, and I was like, no, I'm good. I don't know what I was thinking last night. I'm fine. I don't need rehab.
And then she hit you with a trank dart, right?
Yeah, exactly. Pretty much, man.
Put him in the back. Let's take him.
So after a little bit of conversation, it was like, okay, yeah, maybe I do need help. Nothing's really changed since last night, other than I got, I guess, another 8 hours of sleep. So I went, got help, ended up in Michigan somehow, all the way from Iowa. So, now I'm here.
Now, did you do the treatment center in Michigan?
I did, yeah, in Battle Creek.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. And then with that treatment center, how long were you there?
I was there. It was right around 45 days with detox.
So what did you learn while you were in that treatment center? Anything specific, or more just were you there for summer camp?
I guess it was weird because I didn't learn a lot from the classes and stuff because I wasn't really receptive during that time. I learned more from realizing how I was feeling. So like I was on a stimulant, and then I realized during detox, I'm like, I have more energy and I'm happier than I've been in like 2 years, you know?
Hey, okay.
So
Cool.
yeah.
Okay. So from there, what happened? Because I know your story, but for those who are listening, what happened from there?
Yeah, so I was supposed to go. This is kind of a funny story. I was supposed to go to an AA meeting that night during the treatment. They said my name wasn't on the list, but later on, they're like, your name was on the list. We're sorry. We made a mistake. I went to this other track, the faith-based one, and some guys from Endeavor House came by, and they're like,
what is Endeavor House for those who don't know?
Endeavor House is a 1-year sober living program that is Christian based. It's pretty strict, and it's right here in Lansing, Michigan.
Okay.
Yeah, but strict, but structured, I guess, not strict.
Strict but structured 1-year sober living program.
Yeah.
Kind of, I would say it's a little bit more than a 3/4 house, right? A little bit more than a halfway because of the structuring of the program.
Definitely, yeah.
Normal halfway house 3/4 program. Obviously, you're going to spend a lot of it's just like how many AA meetings did you hit or whatever.
Right.
But I would say Endeavor is certainly a little bit more strict and
Yeah.
structured on that, which is a good thing.
It is,
I mean, especially
100%.
in your recovery is a good thing. So you end up at Endeavor House. How long were you there for?
I was there for a full year. Well, I graduated like a week early because they needed a bed for somebody else. I had a second place lined up. So there for the full year, I graduated the program, and yeah.
Okay. So while you were in Endeavor House, what were some things that you learned?
Oh man. Well, I reconnected to God, that's a big part of my recovery, you know. I kind of learned that AA was something that I enjoyed. NA was something I enjoyed, stuff like that. 12-step groups. I kind of got introduced to that in a proper manner. I realized that I needed structure. I realized some disciplines and stuff like that. And I also learned that I can get in trouble really well when I'm sober, just as I can when I'm high, you know?
Okay. Now, I know that's kind of a joke, but I know that
not really.
But what do you mean? So because we have people that oftentimes think, they have the I would say the Alice in Wonderland syndrome, or they have the Wizard of Oz syndrome. If I could only, there's no place like. It's like the reality is recovery is a little bit more difficult, because guess what? When you're not using the drugs, life comes crashing in, and it comes crashing in pretty quick, right? So what were some of the things you found yourself getting in trouble with?
Well, it was stupid stuff, man. It was like I was being like a know-it-all. So I'd argue with his name was Hollis.
You were being a know-it-all, or you still are?
No, I wasn't. I'm pretty stupid now,
In the spectrum of all things, I'm an idiot.
Right, exactly. So I guess it was like just argumentative. Like I really didn't get along with the house shepherd there. He was the nicest guy. Like I love him now. I love him to death.
Hollis
Matthews,
really good guy. Yeah.
So it kind of came down to I wanted to be argumentative. I wanted to sleep when I wasn't supposed to be sleeping. I wanted to do what Hunter wanted to do. I didn't want to do what Endeavor House wanted Hunter to do.
Sure.
And I kind of pulled a joke that I have the most write-ups in Endeavor House without actually getting kicked out. I guess what saved me is I was like receptive. I didn't blame anyone else.
The weirdest medal, I'm the best at failing.
It's hanging on my wall at my house,
It's a little plaque, right, written out in crayon.
Right.
So can you explain who is the leadership in Endeavor House? How does, if somebody wanted to get in contact with him, just really quick, how do they get in contact?
Yeah, his name is Mike Kenoy. He's down there, but what you can do is just Google Endeavor House Ministries, Lansing, Michigan, and their phone number will pop up on there, like the Google, hit the little call button and call them. And you'll talk to a guy named Mike Kenoy or a guy named Dave Sencox or Mike Kelly Sr. And either one of those three, just talk to them, tell them what you want to do, tell them you want to get in the program, and they're more than willing to get you in there.
Cool beans. So inside of Endeavor, what would you say is the most impactful thing that ended up leading to your success in long-term recovery?
Two things. So one was my connection to higher power. Like I said, that is my recovery. That's a big part of it. I guess it's not all of it, but it's definitely like the center point. And then there's other things that help me get closer to that one point. The other thing that helps me is the community that I had there and still have today. Like Mike Kenoy and me, I talk to him all the time. We're great friends, like not friends, I guess, but like kind of like almost a brother to me,
Sure.
I've made connections there with people that I live with there. And it also taught me that I can't do recovery on my own. That at least for me, I need people in my recovery. I need people in my life that can hold me accountable, that can walk alongside of me. And then I can talk to about some of these crazy thoughts that I have because they understand them. They've been through them too. So.
Absolutely. Let me just take it, as a point of clarity. Out of all the things that were influential there, he not one time didn't mention my name.
Oh, and Christian Powell. Where
he met me. All right. And I pulled him out of the mire. No, I'm joking. Just through mentorship programs and stuff like that, Hunter and I got to know each other. And that's fast forward. We work together. We are now doing a podcast together and all that kind of stuff. So very impactful stuff. So from there, what do you do now? So you've left Endeavor. What are you doing now?
So yeah, like I said, I'm a peer recovery coach. After I graduated Endeavor, I went through.
Let's pause real quick. What is a peer recovery coach?
So peer recovery coach is basically peer recovery support. So what I mean by that, I meet one-on-one with clients as one part of my job, and we go over goals. So we go over like, what do you want to do? How are we going to get you there? And then what barriers are going to prevent you? And how can I provide resources in order to get you to over those barriers?
Okay. Who are you certified through?
I'm certified through Connecticut Community on Addiction Recovery.
Good
so
man.
CCAR.
And you're not just a coach, you're a trainer.
I am a trainer.
You're a trainer, my friend.
Yes, I know. I am a recovery coach trainer as well. So I train people to do what I do. I do it actually with you.
Yes. Self promotion.
I know.
Shameless self promotion. That's what we're about here on this podcast. Okay, so you become a recovery coach. You went through the academy, which it's a process, right? It's 5 days and then 2.5 days for ethics, and then if you decide to go in for the hospital stuff, it's another 2 days.
Which I did. Yep.
Yes. So what did you do from there? Where did you go?
So I went into the hospital first. That was my first experience in the recovery coaching field, was getting into the emergency department and meeting with people there. They come in for an overdose or come in for maybe they're intoxicated or just high or something like that. It's any slew of things. We meet with them, and basically when people come into the emergency department, they really only have a few options, which either they go up to a room, they go out the door, or they die. Mm-hmm. That's pretty much it. There's not much other options. So what we're doing is providing another option. Like, hey, we can get you out the door and into treatment. We try to, that was basically the whole goal, is just get somebody from the hospital to a treatment facility to get the help they need. Mm-hmm. So that was my first experience.
Was there any kind of profound instances that you found inside of there? Was there anything that really taught you about recovery that maybe, let's say, a lay person or somebody just walking out on the street that doesn't know a lot about recovery? Maybe they have recovery themselves, but they don't know a lot about that kind of stuff, because you're in the front line. Mm-hmm. I mean, you're in the midst of the hospital, you're in, the trauma units, you're in the places that it's like, good Lord, it's the place that if you're there, usually as somebody who is struggling with addiction, you're not there willingly. Right. You've OD'd or something has happened. So is there something that's taught you?
Some good and some bad, man. I guess it shows me how willing to go through pain we are, because some people that come in there, man, it's sad. It's people are really hurt. People are really stricken by this disease, and then it also shows you some of the stigma that goes along with it from people who don't really have a good understanding of recovery, which is what I hope this podcast will help with, and it also kind of shows you, I guess, the rest of my job will be very easy outside of here, I guess. Cause like, it was like, I came from like straight into the heat of it. Like now my job, I work more as a PRC and stuff, or peer recovery coach. I'm not a PRC, or as a PRC, but yeah. And it's a lot easier because people are already in recovery or very close to that recovery line. They're starting to get into it. So it makes it a lot easier than working with people who just overdosed and are at the lowest of the low.
And that kind of, that goes into, a little bit of what we talked about on Wednesday, which is the pre-contemplation, contemplation, right, all that kind of stuff. Yeah. So and I definitely empathize with that and listen to my interview next week when Hunter does it with me. But I think there is, for those people who are looking to get into this field, you would do yourself a great benefit to go into one of the hardest positions that you can find, 100%. Trial by fire, because the reality is when you get into those really difficult positions, you don't have to be there for the rest of your life, because the reality it's tasking. I mean, it takes a toll, and it's not a toll that's meant to be trifled with, because we both have at times experienced extreme forms of burnout. We've had conversations about quitting and all that kind of stuff. And if it wasn't for our continued commitment to the recovery community, I think we would have long time by now and started working at, I don't know,
a factory,
or moving furniture or whatever.
Like I pick things up, I put things down. I don't have to have emotional stress.
Exactly. Right. And I think with this in particular, at least in my experience, when I worked in Section 8 housing, I know that was crazy. And then what I do now is less crazy, but it taught me.
Save it for the interview next week.
Yeah, right. It taught me, I know, but it taught me so much more than I could have ever learned in a classroom setting. And I would probably say out along the same lines as you.
Yeah, they didn't prepare. They prepared me, and we both know this. They prepare you for what to do if everything goes right, you know?
And that's something that we talk about in our different classes. So from there, what did you end up doing?
So I worked in there, and then I started kind of pushing my foot in the door here in the office and started
Let it be known he really did push his foot in the door.
Yeah,
It wasn't something that we wanted. It was something that was forced upon us.
They're trying to close the door, and I got a foothold in there.
Got a foot and a shoulder.
So I started teaching a class or two down here. I got trained to do seeking safety, which is it's kind of just a class for people with PTSD and substance use disorder. And then I also got trained in peer facilitated group, which is essentially just a support group. It's not like a 12-step group. It's just kind of like we chat about whatever's going on in your recovery right now, and just kind of open conversation, you know? So I started doing that. And that was kind of my first foot in the door. And then I started working with Endeavor House to take on some of their PRC work over there. So peer recovery coach work over there.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So not too bad. So kind of full circle. You were in, and then now you serve, and then you not only do it for Endeavor House, obviously you do it for a bunch of different treatment programs around here. He takes court referrals. We take off the street referrals. I mean,
right. And now I'm also doing like 6 classes a week. So
and you got like a caseload of 20 or something bananas like
right
that.
about yeah.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, such is the nature of the beast. But what do you think? I mean, from where you were 2.5 years ago to now?
Crazy.
World of difference, right?
World of difference, man.
Good stuff. So let's switch gears a little bit. And I want to talk about, so how do you see the recovery community as a whole functioning right now? We'll go kind of the state of things, of what you see maybe locally, and then kind of what you're seeing maybe as trends nationally, not necessarily like the doesn't have to be statistical analysis or empirical evidence, but it's just like, this is what I'm seeing. This is what I like, stuff like that.
Let me tell you what, if you want statistics and analysis, you got the wrong person.
Yeah,
but
go move down the bench.
As far as locally, man, I am very plugged in the recovery community. You know, I'm very active in meetings. I'm very active in, talking to people. I really like what I see in the recovery community here. Obviously there's pros and there's cons. There's some stuff that's like, I don't really like that. And there's some stuff that's like, I really like that. I like where this is going. Michigan is really ahead from what I've seen. When I was in Iowa, there's not anything like what there is up here. There are some 12-step meetings. There's like one rehab. I don't know. There's probably a few, but one that I knew of, and it was like a 19-day rehab. So there wasn't a whole lot of recovery in Iowa versus up here where I look up a meeting. Obviously right now during COVID, it's a little bit different, but I look up a meeting and it is everywhere. There's like 5 or 6 meetings going on minimally during the day. So it's really available here, no matter where you're at, you can kind of get to a meeting. And then,
so would you say that, like, when we're talking about the premise of recovery, it's super important to have availability?
100%. The harder I got to look for it, the less I want to do it.
That's a fairly profound statement. The harder I have to look for it, the less I want to do it. Right. So you believe that the better access, and maybe, we'll talk about multiple pathways and all that kind of stuff maybe a little bit later on, but if there's a lot of different doors, you're more likely to at least open one than if there's only one door there. And it's just like, I know what's behind that door. I've done it a million times. We're going to have the person at X, Y, and Z meeting, not going to name anybody, but X, Y, and Z meeting that is going to look at me and say, I'm doing it wrong. I'm nothing but no good, dirty, rotten scoundrel, and then walk on.
Yeah. And that can be one of the problems, and we only have, I guess I'll go ahead and touch on multiple pathways. When there's only one option, it makes it hard for people because some people have a bad taste for certain programs, and that's okay. Like I have bad taste for certain programs I have a really good taste for, and those are the programs I choose to go to. So that option needs to be open for people.
So when you say multiple pathways, for those who are listening and maybe don't know what that means, because I think that we always have to take into consideration people that are listening to this, whether they be students or whether they be parents of a child that is suffering. They hear recovery, they hear, those AA or those NA people. Right. Are there more than AA and NA?
100%. So, I mean, AA and NA are the founders. They are the start of the support group movement. AA is, and then AA and NA comes off of that, right? And then we start having things like Refuge Recovery, SMART, which is a Buddhist-based recovery program. It's pretty similar to the 12 steps in its forming, but it is Buddha-based. It's meditation-based. And then you have Smart Recovery, which is like just scientific based. It goes more off the cognitive behavioral therapy from my understanding, which is very slim. I've never really took part in those meetings, but
Well, don't worry. We'll be interviewing Josh Courts, I'm sure. At
Awesome.
one point.
He can tell you all about
Josh
it.
Courts, for those who don't know or who might be listening kind of abroad, Josh Courts is he is the trainer, the guy, if you want to do smart recovery here in Lansing. And
Right.
he is real cool.
Yeah.
He's a little bit too cool for us. So we're fortunate enough that he even knows who we are, but he's a cool guy.
Yeah.
So with multiple pathways, do you find it, when we're looking at a multiple pathway model, do you think that takes away from things like AA or NA?
Absolutely not. So people who want to go to those meetings are still going to go to those meetings, and people who don't want to go to those meetings have another option instead of just not going to those meetings. I've been fortunate enough to see people have to stick because they don't really know. They stick to a program they don't like, and then they go back out. It should be whatever works for them. Whatever recovery they want to choose should be available. It should be their option.
I would say that, and I don't think we have necessarily a unique take on recovery, but I do think in the midst of this training classes and us talking and having conversations not unlike this, which that's a lot of where this podcast stranded out of is,
right.
We saw it as something, well, we have conversations like this all the time. So, I mean, and I don't know about you, but this feels natural. It doesn't even feel like anything so far. Like
Right,
it just feels
right.
like we're doing what we normally do without a mic in our face. But I would say that for the better portion of people, they need something that's going to be affirming of them. They need something that is going to understand them where they're at. And when we're talking about recovery, one of the major points that we use to measure if someone is successful in recovery isn't based upon are they using today or not.
Mm-hmm.
It's based upon what does their life look like today versus yesterday? What does it look like tomorrow versus today? Right.
Incremental growth.
Incremental growth. And it's like, yeah, somebody still might be using meth or heroin or crack cocaine or alcohol or weed or whatever that might be. But it's like, they got their kids back. They got their house back. There's movement in the right direction.
And it's all heading towards sobriety.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. And as we always say, abstinence isn't recovery and recovery isn't abstinence.
Right.
They're both things that can be interchangeable necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
You can be abstinent and be in recovery, but you can also be in recovery and not necessarily be abstinent.
Yeah, but abstinence does come eventually.
Right. And it's something that if you don't understand what we said or what we meant when we just said that, please keep tuning in because we're going to continue to talk about that in depth because really this podcast, I think, first and foremost is spreading information and knowledge because we both are. I'm a core trainer, so I'm a national trainer for Connecticut Community on Addiction Recovery. Hunter's a regular trainer, but really you got your phone on during all this.
I'm sorry, I didn't
but really one of the big reasons we're starting this podcast is to break the chain of stigma, is to break stigma around addiction, is to break stigma around recovery. It's something that we want to show people like, we are a much larger portion of the population. And if the biggest people are the loudest people against certain forms of recovery are in the recovery movement.
Right.
There are other recoveries saying to other recoveries, no, you can't do it that way. And that's a problem. That's something that if we can all get on the same page, we can do something great here. And we could really start to combat this in a very effective way.
Yeah, 100%.
So what are the biggest problems you have that you see in the recovery community right now?
Availability of multiple pathways. We kind of already touched on that, but like I said, the harder you have to look for it, the less you want to do it. So I have noticed actually through Lifeboat, they've started to offer refuge recovery meetings in person.
Lifeboat? What's Lifeboat, Hunter?
So
you just mentioned that. What is Lifeboat?
It is Lifeboat a community on addiction recovery, something along
Lifeboat Addiction Recovery Services.
That's what I meant.
Located in Lansing, Michigan.
And that's what I meant.
At 913 West Holmes, Suite 285. We are open for service. Yes, even during COVID, we do hybrid meetings and all that kind of good stuff. You heard a commercial for it at the beginning of this, but we are shameless and we will plug us until the daylight.
That's right. So yeah, I mean, they actually have started to offer some of those. They're looking to offer, or some of those refuge recovery meetings, looking at offering some smart recovery meetings. So that is good because there's been one smart recovery meeting in the Lansing area,
yes,
a week, and that's it. And like I want to see it become popular. I want to see it become everywhere. Because I want people to be like, I want to get recovery. You know what? I tried the 12 steps. I don't really like that. I want to try something else, and then they can. That option's available for them without having to come to someone like me that knows that meeting's going on, so I can send them to it. Otherwise, I would have no idea.
Well, and I think to quote the big programs that, these recovery is a program of attraction. It can't be forced upon people. We've seen it time and time and time again that people who often get ultimatums, nudge from the judge or ultimatum from a loved one or significant other, they maybe go in and maybe hopefully they'll glean a little bit, but a lot of times they go right back into the old sets of behaviors because they didn't want it in the first place. And it's like, we have to jazz up recovery. Now, recovery doesn't necessarily need jazzing up. I mean, it's a beautiful thing, but it's like, how do we start putting it out there to show not only people who are in addiction, but people who are in the culture as a whole? Recovery is important, and it's better than not being recovered. It's better than any drug that you could ever do. You can get your life on track. There are people to help you. We just have to find the way.
Absolutely. I feel like, and to touch on the question you asked earlier, another problem that I see in the recovery community, and this is something they've done a lot too, and I don't really know a way to fix it, but the lack of knowledge of people struggling with addiction and know that what's out there for recovery. Because I know in my own recovery,
so getting information into their hands.
Exactly. Because my addiction, and we take steps to do that. So don't get me wrong. I don't think that we're not doing things to help with that. But during my addiction, I had never even knew that recovery was really possible. Like, I knew rehabs were a thing, but I didn't know 12-step meetings were a thing. I didn't know sober living houses were a thing. I didn't know recovery was cool. Because I'm like, me, I've been smoking weed since I was 14 years old. I'm like, drugs are fun. What do I do without drugs? There's really nothing to do out there.
Sure.
I never realized, I never had that exposure from the community of recovery saying, hey, bro, I know you think you're having fun, but you're really not. And this is a lot more fun, So.
And I think that's a pretty profound point that you made. Like, I know you think that you're having fun.
Right.
But it's like, as we know, as we look back, because guess what? Guilty as charged. I thought I was having fun. I thought, why not? I get to screw around, mess around, and I didn't have to face my demons. I didn't have to face the day. I could just smoke a bowl and watch cartoons. That's probably what I was doing. I was very juvenile.
SpongeBob Square.
SpongeBob Square or Scooby Doo, more like it. Copyright. Copyright. Calm down. Everybody calm down. It was less than 3 seconds. Calm down. All right. No, but I thought that was fun. And now I look what I'm doing now and I'm like, I would never want to do that again. I would never want to wish that on my worst enemy. Like, this is fun. This is fun being able to think in innovation. And here's the thing, for those who are listening, this did not happen overnight, right? No. You've got 2.5 years sober and clean today.
Yesterday.
So 2.5 years, 6 months, and 1 day clean and sober today.
Right.
And then I have a little bit over 6 years clean and sober. You're welcome. Yeah, thank you. You wish you could just but touch the train of my robes. Not really. We're gonna have some people in here, trust me, that have, more clean time than both of us time together multiplied by 5. We're gonna have a lot of people in here. But when it comes down to it, it does. I think it is really important to show people that recovery can be interesting, recovery can be fun, but it is work and it's going to take time.
100%.
And it's not going to happen overnight. And that's unfortunate because addiction is the disease of instant gratification. So people want it. They want that high. They want that success. They want it right now. And it's just like, that comes with incremental change over time to change the behavior, which leads to success.
Right. Well, a newsflash would be, and a lot of people don't want to talk about this, but life doesn't suddenly become perfect once you stop using. At least not for me. When I stopped using, life still had its problems. I still had things I had to fix that I had damaged in my addiction, including in myself. I had internal stuff I had to process, and I had to learn new coping mechanisms because I took such a huge part of my life out. Drugs were a huge part of my life, and I had to find some way to cope with that sort of stuff that I was feeling without the use of substances. So it's work. Like you're saying, it is work. It's hard, but now it's second nature, now it's like I have a problem and I cope with it healthily, sometimes I don't, sometimes I might eat too much or something like that. Like, I still have behaviors that aren't necessarily good.
And there's going to be coping mechanisms a lot of times, the person that doesn't necessarily have a coping mechanism, and it can range anywhere from not great healthy choices to fantastic healthy choices to fantastic healthy choices in the extreme, which become not great. If you're like, I'm working out 6 hours a day for the last 2 years to maintain my recovery, and it's just like, are you a bodybuilder? Well, no, I'm working as a cashier. Okay, is that healthy?
Right.
You know what I mean? And not to say like maybe the cashier's great for you. I'm not
Mhm.
saying anything, but it is coming down to like you got to make sure that there's a balance. There's a balance with everything.
You said the key word, man. The hot button word, balance.
Balance.
That's what recovery really is. I mean, it's a balance. It's a balance of having fun. It's a balance of being responsible. It's a balance of being, having this group and this group. It's a balance of time alone versus time with others. Everything in my recovery is about balance.
Yes.
It's got to be even.
It's got to be even, and that's I think you're absolutely right. So let's go down to another question here, which is what advice would you give a parent struggling with an addicted child or a loved one struggling with an addicted loved one?
Call Families Against Narcotics.
Ooh,
Yeah,
buzzwords.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Families Against Narcotics, for those of you who don't know, is one of the biggest, if not the biggest, recovery movement in the Michigan area. It's an organization that works,
certainly the most rapidly expanding by a margin,
and very good at what they do. So they work with families and the people who are addicted. So they basically tell the parents what to do. Whenever I get a phone call from a parent who is just doesn't know what to do themselves, obviously I can't tell them anything because of laws and whatnot. But I can say,
what laws are you talking about?
I'm talking about HIPAA and 42 CFR Part 2. Look it up.
2.
Yes.
So look it up. Know its name. Look it up.
Yeah,
it's a thing.
Yeah, it is real. They basically will tell them what to do, because I don't want to tell a parent like you're probably going to have to kick the kid who's living with you out of their house and let them hit rock bottom and suffer until they're ready to get help, and give them that ultimatum of, if you don't want a place to stay, or if you want a place to stay, you're going to have to go get help.
Sure.
Which is a hard thing for, obviously, I would imagine any parent to do. My parents had to do it with me, and I know it was really hard for them.
Sure.
But it's the only thing that led me to recovery, because if I had a place to go back to every night and someone to steal money from, I probably would have never got clean. When I was homeless, bouncing around and sleeping couch to couch, that was a little bit more motivation for me.
Sure. And I think, Families Against Narcotics, you can find them on Facebook. They got a big Facebook presence. You can also look, for those who are listening in the Michigan area, they do have monthly meetings. Obviously right now with COVID, they are doing primarily online. So they do usually the nice thing, it's one of the silver linings of COVID, if you will. They do their monthly meetings online. So you can see experts from around the state, whether it be judges, lawyers, doctors, or whoever it might be. And they do interviews with them. They do panel discussions with them. And their biggest goal is to get as much information into the Families Against Narcotics, it's in the name, right? To get as much information to the families as possible about addiction, about what to do with their loved one. And then they structure it so that they can actually walk with the individual and walk with the family. They have things that are called family coaches, which is not unlike recovery coaches, but it's primarily for the family. They got a little bit more expertise in how to handle the family, giving advice to the family, what they should and should not do, how they should enable them, how they shouldn't enable them, all that kind of stuff, which is really, really cool. They also have Hope Not Handcuffs program, which is a fantastic program that works primarily with people who are struggling with addiction, who may have warrants. It's another pathway, as we were talking about earlier. So instead of them going to prison or to jail or to the courts with those warrants, which they may end up in court at some point anyways, but they will get the individual into treatment, and all the individual needs to do is really just walk into the police station and they can make that happen. They have, what is it, Hope and Healing, which is kind of like that, except it is like our Assert program, as Hunter was telling you earlier. It's recovery coaches primarily in the hospitals that is going to help the individual get into treatment and all that kind of stuff. And the nice thing about Families Against Narcotics is they do it in such a way that the individual is completely supported in all facets, which is fairly unique approach, but definitely suggest that if you're a parent or a loved one that is in need of help, look up Families Against Narcotics. They always got people manning their phones. They always got people manning their Facebook links, so they will get to you ASAP.
Yeah, and then my other suggestions might be, for those of you not in the Michigan area, if you're tuning into this, there is Al-Anon, which is for the families of people who struggle with alcoholism. And then there's also, it's kind of up and coming, but it's called Nar-Anon, and it is people who are family members who struggle, or have family members who struggle with narcotics. And you got to kind of find them, and it might not be for you, but it's worth a try. So,
and that's the thing too, is like, it really comes, you got to just throw as much at the wall and see what sticks, especially in early recovery. That is one of the most important things, and one of the most important details, characteristics, talents, whatever you want to call it, is the ability to buckshot things, is try everything Forget the things that don't work. Start remembering the things that do work and start to hone those skills around the things that do work.
Absolutely.
So what area could the recovery community do better at focusing on? Kind of a loaded question.
It
I know.
is, yeah.
In your opinion, we'll go with in your opinion.
Yeah, I was gonna say this is very opinionated.
Yeah, in your opinion, what area could the recovery community do better on focusing on?
Reintroducing people who struggle with addiction into the community again.
Can you elaborate on that? I like that, but
so I mean, there's TED Talks on this. There's a lot of people who kind of chat about this sort of thing, and it's come up quite a bit. But basically, getting people back into socializing with people, back into having a stable job, back into actually being a member of society, because isolation is not good for, I don't care what pathway someone chooses. The one thing that I will say, and this is my opinion, but has to be there, is support and community. No matter, I don't care where you find it. I don't care what that's through, but you have to have somebody or something in your life to where you're not by yourself in this, because recovery is not a do-it-yourself sort of thing. It's not a DIY project, you know?
Sure.
So
do it yourself for anybody who's like, what's DIY?
yeah, I'm a redneck, you know.
Oh. Yes, he is.
A little bit. Not really.
Just a scope.
Just flow. I'm from Iowa. Come on.
Not really. Good gosh.
So I guess it's just getting them back into society somehow. I mean, for me, I was lucky. When I came here to Michigan, I went to a program. I knew nobody here. I knew one person actually that I met in rehab.
Which is very fortunate.
Yeah. And it was literally like the only person in Lansing I knew. And then I went to a program where I met 16 other guys, and then went to programming all the time and plugged in with more and more people, and was introduced into a fairly large community fairly quickly, because if I had to do it by myself, I would have relapsed. So if I would have moved back to Iowa without the community that I gained, like I would have moved back to Iowa and not gained that community, and I would have relapsed.
Well, I think one of the interesting parts too is that one person that you met ended up being somebody that got you a job.
He did. I won't disclose any names or locations, but yeah, my first job here, it turns out the guy I met was a hiring manager at my first job. So,
which is,
yeah,
a nice bit of luck there.
A little bit of serendipity, you know?
Yeah, serendipity, divine serendipity, if you will. So I would, integration is the name of the game. I think that is such a huge part, is it does come down to the individual being able to get involved with a community that is like-minded as much as possible. See, this is what I'm talking about. This is why this is everything wrong with what is happening. You don't silence your cell phone. Good gosh. Okay. So what should someone look for in a sponsor? Let's change it up a little bit. As somebody that, has done programming or has been around programming, we don't have to out you for what programs you are not a part of unless you want to. But what do you look for in a sponsor and a mentor?
There we go. So yeah, I was going to say sponsor / mentor, something like that. So those of you who don't know, sponsor, someone in a 12-step community, someone who walks you through recovery, walks you through the steps, someone you call, someone's opinion you take very highly. So when you're looking for a sponsor, in my opinion, I've always been told, find somebody who has what you want and ask them how they got it. Mm-hmm. So if I meet somebody and I really am not fond of their recovery or fond of the way they live their life, I'm probably not going to talk to that person about being my sponsor. But if there's someone that I'm like, I want to be like that dude who has 10 years sober when I got 10 years sober. So I'm going to talk to that guy and say, okay, what do I have to do in order to get there? And then if he's willing and he doesn't have too much going on and he wants to sponsor me, then he'll help walk me through that, And then as a mentor, once again, just someone who has what you want, and you got to figure out how they got it.
So let's go a little bit further on that. So what are some red flags, would you say, as far as looking for maybe a first or a second sponsor? If you're early in recovery, what are some things that you want to look out for? That's like, be careful.
Find somebody who's well-known in the recovery community. That would be one of my best bets to keep away from anything.
What do you mean well-known?
Someone who goes to the meeting and they shake people's hands and people seem to know who that person is. And it's a good way of avoiding those people who are probably not there for the right reasons. Find somebody who's got some clean time. Don't find somebody who's, 1 month clean or 30 days clean, whatever. I guess that's still 1 month, but
math.
Yeah. It's up there somewhere. So find somebody who's got some substantial clean time that is working the program that you want to work, and
that is known.
Right. Some people know, not just some guy that nobody knows that might be a drug dealer at a meeting. You never really know what's out there.
That does happen for those of you who are listening, who are listening because, on behalf of a loved one or whatever it might be. Drug dealers do go to meetings. Mm-hmm. The meetings, everyone that I've went to the people in charge of the meeting, the ones that are running it and all that kind of stuff, they do a fantastic job at making sure that every person that walks in that door, they know their name, they know what's going on, even if they're new. And that's definitely something you want to look for. Is like in going to a meeting, barring, it's not a 500 person meeting, which those do exist. And if you're going to a 500 person meeting, you really got to be clear. It can be an amazing, best meeting in the world, but you got to be really clear that even inside of that, at that point, it turns into somewhat of a church service, because there's no way that everybody's going to be able to share.
Usually that'd be a speaker meeting. If it gets that large, it's a big speaker convention, something like that. Right?
So you want to make sure that you have a tight knit group. Don't be just another face in the crowd. You need to have people that you're accountable to and that are accountable to you.
Right. A little word of advice. If you go to your first meeting, find that guy who is reputable, even if you don't want him to be your sponsor.
Well, we call him the Don.
Yeah, the Don of the meeting. Go find that guy and have a conversation with him. That guy who walks in and is like, hey, how's it going? And says everyone's name in the meeting, shakes people's hands, talks to people. 25
years in recovery. You come to me on the day of my daughter's wedding.
Ask me for recovery.
You ask me for recovery. People get to the meeting early so they can touch the train of his robes, so that they can sit. Oh, I got to sit next to the Don. So that's the guy you want to look for, or the gal, the guy,
whoever
the gal.
Yeah.
It's this person you want to go and look for inside of that meeting. You want to be able to walk in, see who people are gravitating to, see who is, not to say the most boisterous, but the person that's laughing, the person that has a smile on the face, the person that every seat at their table is filled and they're all everybody's pointed at him while he's dishing out wisdom, talking, or she's dishing out wisdom and talking.
Right.
You want to find that person and get connected with them.
Yeah, and get his phone or get her phone number. If you're a female, obviously, or go with cut that part out. Find their phone number, get it, and call them, and call them whenever you're having a hard time, or call them if you need help getting to a meeting or something like that. And they can help plug you in to a meeting. They can help plug you into getting rides, stuff like that. It's a very valuable resource to have, is that person who knows the recovery community and knows the people inside of it.
Absolutely. And with those guys or gals, that the reality is, a lot of the times, especially if you're new to recovery, and I'm just saying this now so that you understand what happens in front of you, they are not going to be your sponsor. More oftentimes than not, that person will not be your sponsor at first. Oftentimes that person has like 12 sponsees, a lot of sponsees, right? And all of their sponsees has like 5 years of pop, and he's got a bench like 30 deep for people who are waiting all of them have their own sponsors. But the moment he's like, well, I got this position open, they snap it right up. That's okay. Don't be disheartened if that person doesn't want to be your sponsor. The best thing that you can do with an individual like that is approach them, say, hey, insert name here, I am new to recovery. I've got a couple of weeks clean, sober. I want to get to a place where I can find long-term sobriety recovery. I know you have a lot of it. What's some wisdom? What's some knowledge? What can you tell me that, I can utilize? Can you point me in a direction of somebody that's maybe looking to be a sponsor to somebody? Mm-hmm. And here's the truth. There are meetings out there that it is common practice where they will not say you're ready for a sponsor until a few weeks, few months, maybe even a year into the program. Do not be disheartened if it's like they say, well, we don't sponsor until a year into the program. There are people that do it before that, but if they're like, well, we want you to get a couple of weeks or whatever it might be, don't be disheartened by that. Keep on coming back. If there's somebody that you were like, man, I really want this person to be my sponsor, but they say I need like a month clean and sober, then get that month clean and sober. You got that post in the ground to start working towards. Mm-hmm. So don't be disheartened.
Absolutely.
So what is the best way to recover? The best way.
Wow. The best way.
In your opinion.
In my opinion. So what worked for me? I'll go with that.
Good answer.
Yeah,
good answer.
Yeah. I'm going to say what went for me was getting into a formal program. It was going to an actual rehabilitation program with a detox, getting 45 days clean before I was even had the option to really do anything else. As my parents told me, if I decided to leave that rehab program, it was going to be a long ass walk back to Iowa.
Fair enough.
Yeah. So it gave me 45 days to think about why I didn't want to go back to where I was. And then I went straight into a sober living program. I literally went from rehab. Parents picked me up, drove me to Lansing. And that night I was at Endeavor House. And I stayed there for a full year, and I had structure. And there are points like the 6 months in, about 6 months in, I almost relapsed there. When I went back to Iowa. So it's not clean cut. It's not always great, you know. I didn't relapse, but I almost did.
Why?
So I was not taking my program seriously. That before that 6 months hit, that's where I was getting all the write-ups. That's where I really didn't want to take in the program. I was like, you know, I'm too good for AA.
Well, I think you made a very interesting statement that I think can be unbelievably beneficial for those who are listening in recovery, for those who have loved ones that are struggling with addiction, for students or teachers that might be listening to this. You said, I didn't take my program seriously.
Right. No matter what
in the world do you mean by that?
It doesn't matter what your program is. If you take it as a joke or you take it as in it's just something I have to do, it does nothing for you.
There's an interesting thought there. So when it's something that you have to do, it becomes a burden.
It does. And it's like, I don't want to listen to people that I don't want to listen to. I'm a grown man. I'm not going to listen to people who have no interest in hearing what they're saying because I'm being, I guess, it's a word I'm looking for. I'm being ignorant, really. But when I actually switched my focus, like that relapse, that woke me up. That was the awakening moment for me.
How close were you?
I called my drug dealer. When I was back and I was hanging out with someone who I used to use with, we were talking about drugs. And it was just a really bad chain of events. I should have never left my accountability and stuff like that.
You playing with fire, boy.
Exactly. So I called my drug dealer, but he was on the other side of the state. So I kind of got lucky.
Amen.
Yeah, right. It was like, 4-hour drive. I was like, you know what? And then after I called him, I was like, what am I doing? So I called my parents because it's the only really accountability I have there. That's going to be like, no, I'll drag you out by your hair, you know? So I called them. I was like, hey, you guys want to come pick me up? And then I called the director of the program I was staying at. I told him what happened. And when I went back there, we had a conversation about it. And I was like, I cannot go back to Iowa for the rest of my time in this program.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I think you found a very profound point. So let's break down this chain of events. A lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Right. It first started with what I like to call the revelation of recovery, trademarked. Revelation of recovery.
Patent pending.
Patent pending. It's not going to be patented. Please use it. But you had a moment where you were, if the stars were aligned, it would have happened.
Yes.
But because of, divine serendipity, intervention from the Most High, or just sheer dumb luck, it didn't. And this individual was on the other side of the state. What your immediate sequence of events afterwards was, first and foremost, radical honesty.
Right.
Radical honesty to a point that I would dare say, because I remember this. I was on the phone with you too.
I think I called you. Yeah.
Yeah. Radical honesty that you've never had before. Because you've had honesty. You're a very honest guy. You're a very truthful guy. I believe every word that comes out of your mouth, unless you're talking about yourself or how
I can bench 250 pounds.
Never mind. I take back everything I just said about him. But
I ran a marathon one time.
I did that thing with that one thing. No, but he was radically honest to the point where he could have gotten in trouble, and he was willing to burden whatever was going to be. Like, he was going to satchel up, and he was like, I'll take the consequences for whatever it is. So he's honest with his parents first.
Yes. Yep. I had the conversation with my parents. I talked to you, and I also talked to some people in the program, and was just brutally honest, because at that point it's be honest and maybe get a slap on the wrist, because I'm not going to get kicked out of a recovery program for almost relapse.
No,
but I might get scolded. I might not be able to go back and see my family for a while.
You got a finger wag for sure.
Yeah. And that's what I needed, because it's either a little bit of trouble or it's ruined my entire sobriety. Go back to where I was and throw away everything that I gained at that point. So it was a pretty easy choice.
Now, let me be clear here, because what he's talking about is a unique circumstance that is relative to him, Hunter Taylor. The truth is, if you are in a program and you do end up taking the step over that plank and you do end up relapsing, the worst thing you could do is be secretive about it. Be quiet about it. Stop coming back. Stop going to your meetings. Stop going to your sponsor, your programming. Keep going.
Right. I guess I'll say this. If you want to go back to using, then that's the route you take, right? You go back and you just drop off the face of the earth if you want to go back to the hell you were living that brought you to recovery. But if you don't want to live that way, exactly what you're saying, you need to be honest. You need to get plugged back in, and you need to admit what you did, because those people who you're telling that to are going to get you the help you need.
And I know many recovery stories because I've been doing this for a while now, and a lot of people who I have the utmost respect for and who are in what I would consider 5 years recovery or maybe even more. Those people sometimes had the last hurrah. And it is never, I would never encourage anybody to do the last hurrah, but the last hurrah is essentially they have some clean time, recovery time. Maybe it's in Hunter's case, 6 months or a year, something along that line. And then they get it a wild hair and they go and do it again. And what ends up happening because of it scares the living heck out of them. They will not, they just like, I'm never going back to this ever again. They have that revelation and say, I'm done. Done. I'm no more negotiations, no more bartering. I'm not taking hostages. This is done. And when I say taking hostages, we have a term called taking your recovery hostage, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. So you were drastically honest with your parents. You were drastically honest with the head of that program, the director, Mike Cunway, over at EHM. What else happened?
I became honest with myself. That was probably the biggest thing. I had to realize that I was not taking my recovery seriously.
Okay.
And like, don't get me wrong, I've had problems since then, like to where I've not taken my recovery as serious as I should. But that was the first moment where I realized this isn't a joke. This is either I do these things or I use again and I hate my life again. It's either way. It's one or the other, because there's no half into whatever you're doing. It's either you want to stay sober, you want to stay clean, you want to do the things you have to do to get there, or you want to get high again.
Sure.
That's not going to be your train of thought, but that's what the reality of the situation.
It becomes that switch in your head. It's either flipped on or flipped off. And if it's even, for those of you who, when you were a kid, tried to like take the light switch and put it in the middle, like, I wonder what happens if I do this. Like, you can't do that. It is a choice. You are either on one side of the line or you're on the other. And until you can very clearly distinguish what side you're on, you're going to struggle.
100%.
If it's I'm all into one, then you're all into one. If it's I'm all into the other, then you're all into the other. And there's going to be times where you're, like we said, multiple pathways. You're going to be teetering that line where your life is still improving, but you might still be using. That happens. And we are 100% in trying to support you to the point where you no longer feel like using is a necessity, so that you can start to live your life. And sometimes that happens really quick for some people and it happens much longer for others. But at the end of the day, it does turn into that light switch moment. You need to have a moment like you had where it's like you were so scared to death that it's like, I can either take this for real or I can go back to living what I live. I can lose everything that I have, or I can continue forward. Right.
And that's the reality of it. So back to your original question about that recovery, what works best? I've kind of thought of a better answer, I guess. And that is, get away. This is true for every pathway, in my opinion. Once again, you need to get away from the people you're using with, get away from as far away from all that scenario as you can. I moved states.
As generic as it is, people, places, things.
Right. Exactly. People, places, and things. You got to change that. And then you got to replace that with something healthy, no matter what it is. That's really the best way of recovery, is not only taking away, but replacing with something good.
And people, places, and things, not all people can find themselves in the position that Hunter did, which is, moving states completely.
Right.
But there are times where it's like, you got to stop going down that street because there's a liquor store that you always pick up alcohol from, or my drug dealer's house is the second from the end of the corner. Just stop going down that street, even though it's going to add 5 minutes to your time to get home.
Right.
It just is what it is. So before I ask you the last question, I want to get one more in, which is, what are your thoughts on stigma in addiction, stigma in recovery?
It's definitely there. It's real. I've heard it 1,000 times if I've heard it once. It's like you go and you talk to someone who doesn't know about addiction, and you're pegged an addict, you're pegged a junkie. It's pegged as in you're not as important as them because you struggled with something in your life. And it is sad. It's sad to see that in the world, and we see it in all aspects of the world today, just a lack of understanding and compassion for people because they're different than us. And that's not okay, and I want to see a way to where recovery can be public enough and can be mainstream enough to where people are like, hey, maybe these people aren't that weird. Maybe these people aren't all just scum of the earth. I see people in recovery, and I see very talented people out there. I see people with a lot of potential.
Sure.
But we don't want to see them as that because they've had a shady past, or because once an addict, always an addict.
It's easy to write them off.
It is, and it's sad. I want to see a day where we can look at people with addiction, look at people without addiction, and not judge either any differently.
Well, and I think one of the most interesting parts is some of the most famous people in this country, certainly, and possibly the world, are people who have struggled with addiction
There's a
before.
lot of them out there.
Samuel L. Jackson, you know, Robert Downey Jr., Iron Man himself. These are people who struggle with addiction that are in long-term discovery or recovery. They found their pathway that works for them. And what are they doing now? They're making the movies that we all want to go and see. Right. So, you know, who knows what Iron Man would have been doing if he hadn't have been locked up, or so he would have sucked. Robert Downey Jr. for life. To be clear. No, but I think that it is a reality that it's like, you know, not to sound, I guess, like a zombie movie, but they walk among us. Like, you know what I mean? Like they're all over the place. People with it who are in recovery from addiction are all over the place. And guess what? Statistically speaking, the reality is anybody listening to this podcast more than likely is 1 or 2, you know, degrees from Kevin Bacon away from somebody who's in addiction.
Right.
And it doesn't necessarily, the problem is, I think so many people hear addiction and they think about the guy on the corner that's screaming to the heaven or smoking the crack pipe or something like that.
Or asking for change or something. And that's not reality.
It's like addiction is, you know, the high school kid who's star of the hockey team or the football team or the soccer team who's popping pills because he broke his collarbone and isn't telling anybody that he's doing it in dark, or he's buying it, you know, from his classmates. That's addiction. And it happens all the time, and it's happening more and more and more.
Right. I mean, it's not like we don't have people in high professions or anything like that either that don't struggle with addiction. It's very prominent, whether it's functioning or dysfunctional addiction. And I think most people know what I'm talking about there, whether they're functioning in their life on appearance level, is where we draw that line, which isn't the case. Like if I'm drinking every single day, every single night when I get home, I'm having 8 drinks. I am addicted to alcohol.
Yes.
Whether or not I'm functioning or not, that's a different story.
Because there's plenty of people that can drink more than that and function completely and successfully.
Right.
But it's like, come on, man.
But it's still addiction. We don't want to see that as being part of addiction, because then that kind of ruins that narrative of who we can be biased against. You know?
Absolutely. And I think, you know, one of the things that needs to change the most is people's understanding that oftentimes when people are using, it's to cover up. It's because there's something there.
There's some trauma.
There's trauma. There's something that they don't want to talk about, that they're using so much as, for lack of better word, you know, coping mechanisms. Their body, their brain were not able to develop adequate enough coping mechanisms that they have to utilize a substance so that they can kind of walk away from that and be okay.
Right. I mean, statistically speaking, in addiction, we usually see it start in younger years before the prefrontal cortex is even developed. So before they have that decision-making process, before they're old enough to develop healthy coping mechanisms, they've turned to substances. So, I mean, it makes sense. It's just to hurt people. I've never met anyone that struggles with addiction who doesn't have some issues going on in their life.
100%.
And it's not their fault. I mean, maybe part of it is their fault, whatever you want to say. I don't care, you know, but like people are hurt, you know, they need help, and they're not defects. They're not like the scum of the earth.
And
they're
I
just
think it's
hurt
one
people.
of the worst parts about American culture in particular. I would say Western culture in general, which is, you know, we put the onus of responsibility for the addiction on the individual. It's like, yeah, that very well may be. If they're 45 years old and they're struggling with alcohol, crack, or whatever it might be, sure, there is a level of responsibility that belongs on them. Well, let's go ahead and take a look at their life.
Right.
You know, I can't tell you how many people I talked to. I started drinking alcohol at 14. Well, what in the world? Do we hold that person responsible?
Right.
A 14-year-old?
They're still 14.
They're still 14. We won't let them to vote. We won't let them join the army. Like, why are they all of a sudden responsible at 14? And then not only that, it's like the mountains of evidence around brain chemistry and brain development that shows like they had no idea what they were doing. And not only that, they've been using since then. Their prefrontal cortex and things like that are not fully developed. And then when they stop using, people wonder why they're still 14. Right. It's just like they're operating not on all 4 cylinders.
Doing the best they can.
They're doing the best they can. So I think that's definitely a part of the conversation that I'm seeing more and more of.
So am I.
And I think people are talking about that in a very beneficial way, but I think there just needs to be more.
Well, I feel like we're coming to a point where that's going to become more of an reality, because I mean, everyone knows about the opioid epidemic, right? Everyone knows that substance abuse is a very real thing in our society today. So, I mean, quite frankly, as bad as it sounds, the more and more people are getting addicted to stuff, the more and more exposure addiction is getting into the into the world.
Sure.
You know, like all of a sudden this person who is biased against addiction now has a grandson that's addicted, you know, or something like that. Was for case for me. My parents had a very big bias against addiction. My dad was an alcoholic. My aunt was a meth addict, you know, and they didn't like addiction, and they all had their own biases. My grandpa and grandma did. And then all of a sudden their grandson's addicted too. And same with my mom's side, you know,
hurt people, man.
Right.
Like the you know, just the sheer reality of it. If you're struggling with addiction, your kids are probably going to struggle with addiction. If your kids are probably struggling with addiction, there's somebody in your family that is probably struggling with addiction. I have seen it time and time and time again. It does have to do, it is that, you know, the big question, nature versus nurture. We do know the genes that do go into that now. And we'll certainly have a couple podcasts by, you know, much more professional people than us.
Yes.
We already have, as you'll probably hear, I think it's 2 weeks from now, we will be having our podcast with, Reverend Dr. Deborah Smith, who is a clinical. She'll be able to break down some more of the neurology and the brain chemistry. But, you know, we're going to have people who are doctorates serving, who are doctors serving inside the ED and things like that, that'll be willing to talk about this type of stuff
For sure.
more extensively than we will, for sure.
Yeah.
Right. So last question here before we wrap up. So what do you, how do you find this podcast is beneficial, or do you see this podcast as doing something more for the recovery community?
Right. So there's a couple things. The reason I wanted to get plugged into this podcast, when you brought this idea to me, the reason I'm behind it, I think that recovery has a tendency to sometimes fall behind. You know, I listen to some of the videos, I listen to some stuff on addiction, on recovery, but it has a tendency to be a little bit dry, a little bit boring, you know, and a little bit like behind the curve. So I hope this podcast can kind of bring things up to the curve, because people like podcasts, you know, there's a lot of popular podcasts out there.
$50 billion industry.
Yeah, exactly. So hopefully this helps bring recovery into the now. And it also, I guess it can help people in ways that other things can't, because you can't always go to a meeting, but maybe just driving to work, you want to have a reminder about why you're in recovery, and you can tune in and listen, you know?
And for those of you who are maybe just stumbled across this podcast, we do podcasts every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Mondays are going to be more of the technical terms. We're going to talk a lot about brain chemistry, a lot about, you know, the science of addiction, the science of recovery, all that kind of stuff. Wednesdays are going to be more meditational. So for our recovery crowd, we're going to be talking about different things that have to do with meditations or ideas around recovery and staying safe. And then Fridays are just going to be like what you just saw. We're going to be interviewing people who are in recovery, who have to do with recovery, who are recovery adjacent, whether they be people in long-term recovery, people who have doctorates that are working with people in recovery, or parents of people who are struggling with addiction, things like that. But Hunter, my friend, that wraps it up.
All right, man. It's been great.
Just like
Been
that.
great.